Our project today is decoupage seashells. So we're going to start out with some matte glaze and some patterns that I've printed on copy paper with my inkjet printer. You'll want to use very thin, cheap copy paper because it's easier to mold and form to the shell as we're doing here. So it can take a little bit of time to get the shape just right. So just keep working with it. And then we're just going to trim off the excess paper so that it is nice and smooth on the edges, and keep forming and tucking the paper in. Just keep trimming, turning, tucking, and then we're going to form a little bit of a gusset here and trim some of the excess paper out to create a little tuck and make a neater fold that won't stand out as much. Having a tight pattern or a flowing pattern like this paper disguises the fact that we've removed a piece from the pattern. So there's just about 2 places I think that we'll need to do that here. And I'm just using the end of the brush to make sure that it tucks all the way inside the divot. So the paper is still a bit wet from saturating the glaze through, and you want to keep working with it as it's still wet. Now that the paper is basically shaped to the shell, we're just going to do a nice heavy coat of the matte glaze on the inside of the shell. And you're going to see that the ink is going to run a bit, which is going to give it that really pretty flow blue appearance to match an old piece of pottery. So we're going to work with this pretty floral on our next shell. And just again, using the matte glaze, we're going to saturate the back of the paper really well so it's nice and malleable and can be formed to the shell. And then we'll put it inside and tuck the pattern, tuck the paper all the way in, and smooth out the front so that our tucks and folds are near the back of the shell. That will help disguise that. And also, as with the last shell, pattern is important here. The more asymmetrical the pattern, the easier it is going to be to hide the fact that we're folding the paper over. So we're just going to trim off the perimeter of the paper, make it a little bit easier to work with. And we're going to continue to form the paper to the exact size of the shell, just trimming the edges, turning it around to see how it's matching up, trimming little pieces until it is the exact shape of the shell. And then we're going to put a nice generous coat of matte glaze on the inside, and you're going to see that the inks will also blend together a bit, giving it that nice antique appearance. So our first shell has already started to dry a bit. We're going to put another coat of matte glaze on the inside just to make sure that the paper is completely saturated and ready to move on to the next step. So now we're working with some Victorian Gold Ultimate Paint, and we're just going to edge the entire shell with the paint. So it's important at this step to have your interior of your shell or your matte glaze completely dry, and that your brush is trimmed up and ready to go. Just make sure that there aren't any wispies on it so that you have a maximum control of where the paint is going. So I'm going to do probably about 2 coats of the Victorian Gold on the edges to give it a nice opaque feeling all the way around the shell. So I'll do the front, and then I'll also do the back rim to give it that pretty gold edged look that is so popular on these pieces. So just doing nice short even strokes, and then you can just keep going with coats. You may decide to just let it dry in between coats and then come back and touch it up later. I try to work all at once because I'm a little bit impatient, but you're welcome to go ahead and let that sit for a bit. It looks like we need to trim up a little bit on here, places that we missed when we initially did. But all of that will be sealed in the final step of this process. So we're just going to edge this out as well, just doing the entire perimeter of the shell with the Victorian gold. As you're working on the back of the shell, it can be a little bit complicated or a little bit difficult to get a nice straight, even edge with all of the ridges, but just keep going in with coats until you're happy with the end result. As the glaze is drying, you can really see how pretty these are going to be. At this point, you can add a layer of resin or leave the center as is. Since this one is going to be a pendant, I'm going to resin it. We're going to use a bit of UV resin, and we'll just apply a generous amount to the back of the shell and the jump ring, and we're going to cure that for about a minute. And then we'll turn that over and apply it to the front, and then we're going to cure that for another minute. Once that's cured, we're going to be ready to marry the pendant area with the inside of the shell. So we're going to do a layer of UV resin on the entire inside surface of the decoupaged area. And we're going to want to make sure that there's a decent amount where it attaches into the loop. And then we're going to cure that also for another minute. Now that the inside is completely cured, we're going to be ready to add some Victorian gold to the resin on the loop area of the pendant. So now we have this gorgeous pendant and a lovely ring dish. I hope you've enjoyed this fun tutorial. Happy designing!